Real quick, I'm going to throw in, because folks know me, I'm very casual. We have folks who are just going to talk and just kind of pull up a chair around the kitchen table and just kind of talk about some fun stuff that's going on. So for purposes of time, just know that I personally hit on I said on the dry run, and we have some amazing folks, and I'm not just saying that. And you can get more information. I think what we'll start, if we're good, I think Patrick is on the record for the agenda to go first. If Patrick's ready from Utah DOT, we'll let him share us some information what resilience looks and tastes and feels like out west. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Hello from Utah to our friends in the southeastern United States. This is kind of exciting. It's really cold here. I understand in Florida it's really nice. So it's nice to be a part of this. My name is Patrick Cowley. I am UDOT's Director of Transportation Performance Management, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share a little bit of what we've been working on over the past number of years in our asset risk management process, augmented by a study that we were able to do through FHWA's Resilience and Durability to Extreme Weather pilot grant. Also, as a plug to AASHTO, I'm a member of the TSSR committee and have found a lot of value with the emails and interactions that I've had there. So it's a great thing to be a part of. Absolutely. Okay, so evaluating risk and resiliency helps us to understand how our system will perform under a range of potential extreme weather hazards. And today, that's what I'm going to focus on, is that climate change, extreme weather that we've been experiencing, and how that relates to our infrastructure. It informs maintenance decisions, operational procedures, and the design process as to risk-reducing investments and actions that we can take. With this understanding from our initial pilot in 2017, we applied for an FHWA grant to develop a process by which we could assess risk and evaluate the resiliency of our assets and transportation network. This effort is reflected in the US 40 report by AEM submitted in 2019. And since this report, we've continued to work on the process, making it easily implementable. And it was important for us to do this ongoing work with our existing resources. These efforts are documented in a follow-up report completed earlier last year. We recognize that this is an ongoing effort, and we're working toward implementing, updating, and ultimately measuring the effectiveness of this process. So what I want to do today is share with you a little bit of what we've learned. In the first two studies, we learned about the data-driven RAMCAP methodology. And I had no idea what that stood for. The RAMCAP acronym means Risk Analysis and Management for Critical Asset Protection, a little bit of a mouthful. The name in and of itself highlights what we were trying to achieve with our asset risk program. While the RAMCAP process was developed and used primarily in the mechanical engineering community, the principles can be applied to transportation infrastructure as well. These are the steps of the RAMCAP process shown on the screen that we followed with AEM in the I-15 and US 40 studies. The areas that were new to us from this process included identifying and documenting threat asset pairs, and the concepts of adding vulnerability and criticality to the risk and risk priority calculations. I'll discuss these a little bit more later in the presentation. Taking what we learned from AEM, we decided that being data-driven alone wasn't enough. We wanted to be more holistic in our approach and are building a UDOT process with the goals of being open and integrated. It's important for us to be open to outside ideas and suggestions and have other agencies and organizations be able to use what we have and what we've developed and is tailorable to their culture and their structure. We chose a model-based approach to the process and how we generate replacement costs, where we do not need absolute precision to prioritize risk, but we do need consistency, which allows us to repeat replacement costs and risk calculations. We understand that as we improve our precision, we'll improve our models. Also key to achieving our goals, we needed to be able to integrate the risk process into existing UDOT processes. Risk calculations and prioritization have no value until we incorporate the results into UDOT project decisions. To add to the data-driven part of the RAMCAP methodology, we knew we needed to tap into the institutional knowledge of our employees to make this work. A risk management working group was assembled to inform and direct the process. These are the very people that will be implementing the process that they're helping to form. We meet regularly with the risk management working group to inform of progress and to help refine and integrate this process. We believe with the data-driven approach, augmented with institutional knowledge, we'll have a process that will meet the goals that we've set. With this knowledge firmly in place, the risk process objectives were set. First, we wanted to identify and find a way to prioritize the risk. We would then need to identify and prioritize the mitigation option for each of those risks. And third, we needed to identify how we could make a go, no-go decision. Well, how do we address the risk, or do we accept it with the information that was assembled? With this comparative approach, we felt we can meet objectives 1 and 2. The last objective requires a more accurate approach that we apply in a detailed analysis of the most promising mitigation strategies. So objective number 1 was broken down into 4 steps. Step 1 was to identify the threat asset pairs. Step 2 involved calculating risk values, taking into account vulnerability. By selecting the probability at or near a failure point of the asset, the vulnerability term becomes 1. By choosing the failure probability to evaluate risk for all asset types, the risks between those different assets become comparable. This means we can compare risks between assets. For example, we can compare the risk of a bridge to the risk of pavement to the risk of a failing culvert. We then computed criticality, which then led to risk priority. AEM used risk and criticality to generate a level of resiliency term. We chose to multiply risk and criticality together and call it risk priority. And most importantly, we needed to make the information accessible to end users, and we chose to use a GIS map. By comparison, a travel demand model in the traffic world helps us make planning decisions. It's not reality, but it models reality and is used as a tool to help us make traffic decisions. By the same token, our risk priority map is based on a risk model and helps us to make decisions about risk. At one of the risk management working group meetings, we went through an exercise of identifying all the assets the department had. We then asked them to identify every conceivable threat to each of these assets. We then made a matrix of all the assets with their associated threats. What you see here are all the threat asset pairs the risk management group considered. To make the process more manageable, we focused primarily on roadway assets and the associated extreme weather events. This in turn helped our transportation asset management efforts, including risk, into our transportation asset management plan. Vulnerability is a tricky thing. It involves degradation curves and understanding the failure of the individual assets and their elements for given threats. We've minimized the influence of vulnerability in our risk calculations by carefully picking the probabilities at which we evaluate risk. The design, the damage at design standard is 0, excuse me, because the vulnerability is 0. At the failure point, the vulnerability is 1. However, asset condition and vulnerability are inversely related. The graph shown here is a representation of a potential vulnerability curve. While we've chosen to minimize the influence of vulnerability, we can't ignore the importance of condition on asset risk. Assets in good condition have less risk, And by the same token, those that have degraded have more risk. To improve our calculations and the overall process, we need additional data by measuring the condition of assets as they degrade or as they're hardened to accurately link condition and vulnerability. And this is a work in progress. Then we will turn to criticality. The criticality factors that were selected by the Risk Management Working Group and the results are found in the risk priority map shown here. This can be refined as we mature the process to include critical infrastructure elements such as hospitals, electrical substations, utility corridors, etc. Each agency can tailor this to their own view of the world to what they consider as critical. You can see here the three that we ended up on was ADT, truck traffic, and redundancy. And I think particularly poignant to this group with freight in mind is understanding that critical corridors are typically ones with higher amounts of truck traffic. As previously discussed, we calculated risk priority by multiplying risk by criticality. And here's how it displays on our map. Each of the colored dots on the map represent an asset and the associated risk priority. As UDOT employees are planning for corridor improvements, this map can be a valuable tool to identify opportunities to address asset improvements that have previously gone unnoticed and unaddressed. So on to objective 2, to identify and prioritize mitigation options. The AEM studies helped us give us a way to prioritize risk. However, we realized that we can't always prepare for an event by making assets more robust by reducing their impact, or by making the network more redundant by reducing criticality. There are some assets that our main mitigation option is to respond to the event and not to add it to a project. This includes damaged guardrail or right-of-way fencing. There are others that include planned responses, and yet others that require an upgrade to the asset to harden them or expand the system to make it more redundant. We do not know, for example, how to make pavement earthquake resistant. If our only solution was to make it more robust, we'd be throwing good money after bad. There are other solutions to risk that involve redundancy, resourcefulness, and rapidity. These include pre-planned responses to respond as needed. Measures are intended to help make better decisions and to measure progress. A resiliency measure should be no different. To calculate resiliency, we're exploring the option of using 1 over risk times criticality, or more succinctly, 1 over risk priority. We can normalize risk values between 0 and 1 so that when the risk equals 1 and criticality equals 1, and we have a very poor condition. And in turn, resiliency increases in value as risk and or criticality decrease. To help employees know how to best decrease risk and criticality, we recognize the need to emphasize the 4 R's of risk response. They are robustness, rapidity, redundancy, and resourcefulness. The UDOT risk process has been focused on risk mitigation, but there are other ways to increase resilience. Rapidity comes from the emergency response to hazardous events and can reduce the impact of an event. Resourcefulness comes from better resource allocation when responding to an event. This may also reduce criticality depending on your criticality metrics. Redundancy comes from planning activities where we may choose to build in transportation alternatives to the network. And robustness, this is the one we're most familiar with. This comes from the hardening of assets through design and construction or through other risk mitigation activities. Now, the third objective of the process is to help employees make a go, no-go decision. This means that with all the data and institutional knowledge, we can make an informed and documented decision on how to proceed with an asset. For the future, as we gather and calculate individual resilience data, we'll be able to annualize the risk and show how our actions are increasing resiliency and reducing risk over time. It's important to note that as assets are added to the system, our risk increases, just from the mere fact that we have more assets that are beginning to decline the moment they're introduced into the system. If we're able to annualize the impact, we can produce a graph of the annualized cost of the risk calculated for each of the threat asset pairs. Projects that come through and harden assets would reduce risk, while natural deterioration would increase it. While eliminating risk is impossible, we can manage risk better if we know what it is. In summary, we've developed a data-driven risk process, but we realize the data is not perfect. We take the risk priority map into the corridor planning process, where we gather institutional knowledge to fill in our data gaps. This completes the risk identification process and captures risk concerns in the planning process. Risk calculations are defined in the detailed risk mitigation process, where we also make a go, no-go decision. We implement mitigation strategies that have an acceptable payback period. There's currently no dedicated program funding for risk. We therefore include risk mitigation expenses in concept reports so that risks are funded as part of future projects. Our goal is to have risk considered in project selections, and this is a work in progress. We've included risk discussion in the TAMP, and we'll update our risk process description in our transportation asset management plan this coming year as it's developed. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you've enjoyed your ITTS experience and all that it has offered. If you have any additional questions or comments that we don't address today, please feel free to contact Rule Alder or me at the email and phone numbers here on the screen.
Thanks, Patrick. So, I wrote down some stuff and I thought, we have more in common than I thought. I heard the word earthquake, and I know we've got, ITTS membership on the mid and lower Mississippi Valley definitely has it on their radar. And if I remember, late 1800s, one of the biggest earthquakes in the country occurred in Charleston, South Carolina. So that caught my attention. I also appreciated you mentioning, talking about tying this into freight and truck corridors. And speaking of truck corridors and freight, Craig Hurst is with us from Colorado DOT. I think, Craig, you should be teed up. Again, his bio is in the report. All you need to know, again, is we got two of the best DOT folks in the country to talk to us today about this topic, and Craig's second up to bat. We just flipped the coin to go who goes first. That's all that means. Take it away, Craig. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So my name's Craig Hurst. I am the manager of CDOT's Freight Office, and CDOT's Freight Office just started January 2020. It's an effort to combine freight planning with freight operations, which includes oversize and overweight permits and several other things that we're currently working on. So although I thought that was a fantastic presentation in front of me, I'm going to try to take a little bit different approach that will focus a lot on freight routing and using data to identify weaknesses in our system that we can build more resilient. So Colorado as a whole understands that resiliency planning is more important than ever. If 2020 taught us anything, is that we need to be prepared for everything. So the state has multiple agencies working on collective goals to accomplish that, to improve resiliency in things that affect our daily life. And so the Department of Transportation has a large role in that because we own so many assets within the state. So CDOT's resiliency manager, Lizzie Kemp, as well as small culvert risk mitigation planning. The the team identified small culverts as the costliest risk to our users. So small culvert risk mitigation project has begun to identify high risk priorities and is working with our maintenance teams to develop a sustainable treatment process and scheduling cleaning or replacing small culverts to mitigate the severe flooding risks that we regularly experience here in Colorado. So now that was our basic and what you would always traditionally hear in resiliency, but I want to take you guys down freight routing resilience. And you'll see a lot of GIS work. And I think a lot of what we're doing today is dependent or really even possible because of GIS work. It simplifies our ability to look at assets and how they affect our overall ability to efficiently route or safely route loads through our state. And so the map there that you see on the left, I understand that's way too busy to be effective, but really what I was trying to do by doing a screenshot of that map is just to show how many layers we've added to our freight asset and restrictions map. And really that is kind of our go-to tool or a foundational start where we understand where all of our assets from a freight perspective are around the state. And so you can see this is our port of entry or our way stations. That's all these big P's. Every one of these color-coded dots is a weight-restricted bridge on our system. We also have our runaway truck ramps, our chain stations. And I know maybe not everybody deals with those, but obviously in the mountains, we have to work around those. Then you have our hazmat routing, all of our construction projects that have lane closures or width restrictions. So that's really how we define all of our freight assets or all of our restrictions that we have to manage through. And you'll see why that's so important here real soon in this presentation. And then we consider all of our named freight routes. So, and then, and how those connect to our airports and our railroad systems. And so that's what the second map is. So really, when I took over, I came to CDOT 4 years ago. I come from 10 years in the freight industry, managing a large trucking company. And I really wanted to understand how we are utilizing our routes in Colorado. And I found it pretty tough to find good data besides AADTT. And so what I started to use is single trip oversized and overweight truck data. That really can highlight some of your weaknesses for larger loads. But when you have industries such as aerospace, you have the need to move pretty large items around the state frequently. And so I thought this would be a good data set for us to understand kind of where some of our pinch points or our weaknesses are. So what you're looking at on the left there is all of our single trip permit routing data from our oversized and overweight permit program. You can see that we obviously use, I don't expect everyone to know this, but the 287 and 385 corridor down here is our heaviest used oversized and overweight route. And how much large freight comes out of that. And a lot of this traffic here is related to oil and gas development or wind energy. That uses that corridor frequently. Over here on the right-hand side, we have all of our permits that were routed that were larger than 17 feet. And if you look up the eastern corridor of Colorado, every one of these blue dots is an indication of a vertical clearance issue. And so anything in blue is 16 feet or higher. Those usually aren't too much of an issue. But in yellow, those are between 14.6 and 16 feet tall. And then anything in red is under 14.6, and 14.6 is our legal height. So we obviously are concerned about anything below our legal height. But the interesting thing that we call out on this map is that our eastern corridor does not have any overpasses. And so we tend to use that corridor the most. The problem is that corridor is also a 2-lane road that was not designed for truck or for heavy trucks. And so how can we make the rest of our system more resilient so we're not putting the strain on that corridor because it was not designed to take those loads? So where it gets really interesting is starting to look at how our permits were routed for loads over 200,000 pounds. You can see that there's a pretty fair difference between our standard routing for just the overall oversized and overweight. So that could be, in that world, a pretty small item such as a bulldozer or a scraper or something like that. Those aren't very big in what we're talking about. But once you start getting to the 200,000 pound, or as on the right side, those are loads that are over 500,000 pounds. You can really point out some of the weaknesses in our system and really show why some of these corridors that are on our eastern plains that are in low populated areas, but they get so much use because of the lack of challenges with vertical clearance or weight restricted structures. And so we really use this GIS tools to visualize for our management team and our decision makers exactly why we are asking to make improvements to a structure, or if we're going to replace a structure, we're requesting a design that has a taller vertical clearance. And really, this is about resiliency and redundancy of our ability to move goods and services. And we can't just think about the legal side of things, but if we improve this for the oversized and overweight, it's not only an economic development move, it's, from a resiliency and redundancy, if we have a tornado or flood that takes out this corridor down here, we need to make sure that we have a resilient system in a second or third route so we can respond to the disaster is one of the biggest things that we've seen challenges. You'll see more of that later in the presentation. So really, I want to talk about 3 projects that we've used this data to help us make decisions on. And the map here on the left is our first go a couple of years ago at what we were trying to prove to our management team. So the permit staff that I have knew about a bridge that right here is called P18BP. That's just the way that we name our structures. And we know that has since 1996 been a weight restricted structure that has severely hurt our ability to have heavy loads enter Colorado on I-25. So this structure is 5.6 miles north of the border. If you were heavy at all, we couldn't allow you to come in on that route, and we would force you over to 287, which is at the Oklahoma border. Again, we're looking for resiliency and redundancy. If we had an issue in this corner down here, we would need to be able to bring in heavy equipment to do the cleanup and everything else on I-25 over here. So what are we going to do to fix this structure here? What we did first is we studied border crossing usage, and north of Fort Collins at our Cheyenne, Wyoming border, that's our heaviest used entry and exit point from our state from an oversized and overweight perspective. And naturally, you would think I-25 on the south side of the state would have the close to equivalent numbers there because it's a good north and south route. And that's where we were trying to highlight some of the shortages in our system, is that because of that weight restricted structure here, we have a lot less use at our southern border on I-25, which, to be honest, is a much safer route because of the it's 4 lanes, where this lane over here is just a Super 2 configuration, doesn't have great shoulders, no places to pull off. And so we're trying to bring traffic back to I-25. So the project to replace it, and by using a lot of the data that we just showed you, this project opened up more than 200 routing opportunities for oversized and overweight loads. It can, in certain situations, reduce the overall trip mileage by up to approximately 140 miles. Obviously, that's huge when CDOT's goals is to reduce greenhouse gases and VOCs. And so you can reduce the overall transportation impact on the environment by having this more efficient route options. It again allows for a second entry point for heavy loads, and this could be critical in a disaster recovery or cleanup situation. And the best, one of the best parts about it is we were able to complete this project for approximately $700,000 by using a design of an epoxy injection and fiber wrap. And for the engineers here, the reason this structure has been weight restricted since 1996 is that there was actually minor visual cracking under the deck. And that's what caused them to turn on shear when they were rating this bridge. And most of you know that concrete girder structures are going to have a hard time passing shear. And so what we did is we did epoxy injection of the cracks. And then, as you can see, the difference in color on each of the girders, that's the fiber wrap that actually strengthened this structure to allow for our heaviest loads. And it extended the life for about 30 more years by estimation. So it's equivalent to its sister structure here in the southbound lanes. So originally, when I proposed this project, it was estimated to be between $6 and $8 million. And that was because the on and off ramps were not compliant with FHWA standards today. So instead of a full replacement, we took this approach and have found it to be very successful. I can tell you that not only has this been a quality project for the state, but for the industry and giving them options for movement, this has also been applauded by them as well. So the next one takes a lot of what I just talked about and converts that into our timber structures. Colorado has approximately 150 timber structures left on our system. These timber structures are getting close to 100 years old. They're built in the 30s and 40s and some in the late 20s, but they were built with very good timber back in the day. So the problem that we see regularly on these timber structures is split girders. So the timber splitting, and for the last couple of decades, we've been using a pretty common lag bolt solution to fix those issues. So our bridge asset management unit has data that shows that timber structures are up to a $400 million liability to our system. And many of these structures are also weight restricted, and there are about 60 of them on primary truck routes. So we've worked for about 2 years, myself and our bridge asset manager, on finding a solution that works, because freight money never has the money to replace 60 structures that are on average about $2.2 million to replace. So what we did is we challenged all of our bridge engineers to come up with a design that fit the parameters of a $100,000 fix, can be done by our internal staff, will extend the life 10 to 30 years, and will bring the structure up to a rating that will allow our heaviest loads to get back on those. And then there's some secondary benefits that we found through this, that once we fix these problems, we can go back and fix the quality of the pavement on the deck. And, it becomes a very beneficial program to several different aspects of our goals. And so that, I'm sorry about that. So that project's getting started right now. We've dedicated $2 million to really knock out 15 to 20 of the structures that are on primary freight routes this year. And we are putting together a team and a training program to, we have 3 solutions that basically strengthen these structures. They don't remove any historical status, which is potentially a huge issue. And they're really going to bring efficiency back to our routing, because we will be eliminating some of the challenges that force us to use non-freight routes for some of our heaviest loads, because those non-freight routes don't have any vertical clearances or weight restricted structures. And what does that mean from a maintenance perspective? If we're not using the roads that were never designed for trucks and we're bringing trucks back to the freight routes, you're also going to save money and maintenance time on those secondary roads that you're currently using, because now you're no longer destroying those. And so we're hoping that this improves maintenance schedules as well for some of those roads that maybe shouldn't be taking some of this heavy truck traffic. And finally, the last project, wildfire resiliency. I'm sure everybody has seen on TV, if you haven't been out here and experienced it, that the West has been on fire every summer, even wintertime, just due to the dry conditions and droughts. And so this is something that we're taking a look at. Obviously, it's a federal government website, and it's identifying risks to our communities in Colorado. And we're constantly trying to figure out what we can do to be more prepared, because you never know where a fire is going to start, obviously. And so here's kind of how we're taking an approach to this. So this year, this summer, we had 2 significant fires occurring at the same time. And we had others as well, but this is just one situation. So right here, we had what was known as the Grizzly Creek fire. And then over here, the Pine Gulch fire. And what was very interesting is that because of the location of these fires, it shut down I-70. The Grizzly Creek fire actually hugged both sides of I-70, which is our main east to west corridors. And because that shut down for more than 2 weeks, simultaneously, you have this fire going out here. And these are the 3 airports that were supporting the aerial firefighting operations. Well, all of our fuel resources, so petroleum refining, happens here in Commerce City and Aurora, Colorado. And there is a train that leaves Suncor Refinery once a week to deliver fuel out to our western slope in Grand Junction. Well, that train track is also in the same canyon as I-70, and it was on fire as well. And so the challenge was, how do you get aviation fuel to these 3 airports when it's a 16-hour round trip from here to up to here because of all the mountain corridors that you have to travel through? There's no direct route when you shut down I-70. If you go to Salt Lake City area, it's another 16-hour round trip. If you go up to Wyoming to fill your fuel, it's another 16-hour round trip. So we were really stuck with no legal way to get aviation fuel up to these airports to support the firefighting efforts. And when I mean legal way, everybody understands that you can only drive 11 hours a day. We worked with our state patrol to try to get emergency 2-hour, an additional 2 hours for the emergency. And we were able to do that, but that still had 3 hours of drive time that we needed to take off of these trips to be able to get the fuel where it needed to go. And when we were looking at how our public information office was sending message to the freight industry, they were telling folks to stay on 80 and then enter Colorado up here in Wyoming, or stay on 40 and enter Colorado from the south through New Mexico. And the problem is we weren't considering some of the loads that were trying to help us respond to these fires. So bulldozers and some of the other assets that are called in for firefighting also require oversized and overweight permits, so they don't, fall through a structure or hit a bridge. And so we made this map quickly by going to all of our neighboring states and calling out some of the restrictions that they have for oversized and overweight loads. And we were able to bring bring this map to our executive management team that was working on these solutions and show them all the challenges that we had laid out that really makes routing an issue for these loads. And what we ended up doing as a solution was working with U.S. Forestry Department and our folks that were on the ground managing the road closures. And we ended up allowing these aviation fuel trucks to be escorted through the canyon once they were empty. And that was the trick to shave off the final 3 hours. We could get aviation fuel there in one single trip. If you do it in 2 trips, it increases the cost of those fuels greatly because you're having to pay for hotels and meals and everything else. And there's just not enough drivers to service the needs in this situation. So that solution ended up being on the fly, worked out really great, but we attribute a lot of that to our ability to map our problems before they happen. And so we're showing kind of all of our challenges here in front of us. And you know what problems you have to solve for right away because you already have this asset map as a foundational layer, and you can add quick, we added the green lines to show where the road closures were. And the final thing is during this whole discussion, we also highlighted a project that started this month. And we said, hey, we have this large fire on I-70. Our geohazard folks are saying we're going to have mudslides for the next 7 to 10 years because of all of the vegetation burn. And we wanted to highlight that the project on Highway 50, which is our good second route for east to west, this project is going to be expanding that highway to 4 lanes, but it's going to be doing rockfall in the canyons to do so. And so it's going to shut down Highway 50 for almost 2 years for large portions of that time. And what's going to happen if I-70 is closed down at the same time due to a mudslide or snow or whatever the case may be? Now we have both of our east to west routes closed, and we're going to have some significant challenges managing our freight movement, servicing all of the mountain core or all of the mountain communities for cold storage and fuel. They're heavily reliant on truck traffic. And so we're trying to work through resiliency from that aspect of how do you approach solving the problems if we have simultaneous issues on both of our heavy east to west routes. So, just like the presentation before me, there's so much more that I can go into about what we're currently working on today. Please feel free to reach out to me by email. I have no problem. I'm sorry I didn't put my cell phone number here, but if anybody's writing it down, it's 720-899-0808. But please feel free to reach out and call me. Obviously, I can get pretty excited about this stuff, but GIS has been a huge help for us. I have a GIS specialist on my team now, which seems weird for a freight office, but that's exactly why. We're building a lot of maps that have made a big impact on the way we look at things.
Thanks. And Craig is also an elected local official. So don't call him, don't give it to your relatives out in Colorado to call to complain about the trash pickup on their street, right, Craig?
No, I'll take those calls. Just has to be after 4:30.
Man, this is just, I'm sorry, I'm just personally just thrilled by this stuff. And I'm writing down ideas of stuff, and hopefully other folks are. I see stuff in the chat box that we'll get to at the end where I'm like, oh, I have work to do, right? Which is a good thing. You guys came in and gave me tons of ideas, and hope everybody else did too. It looks like we've got pretty good on time. I'm going to ask Melissa if she wants to come in as the AASHTO rep. Maria's works for her. You see Maria's name on the program. Maria's working for Melissa, right, on several of the projects. So if Melissa is ready and you want to just take it and kind of give us that, hey, AASHTO is great, which y'all are, and set Maria up, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Frank's gonna share a couple of my slides. So I always include, and you can go to the next slide. So here's what I'm going to talk about really quickly. I know a lot of you have already heard about AASHTO, so I will quickly give that. I also want to talk about AASHTO's overall approach to resilience, and then what we have planned this year. So you can go to the next slide. So as you all have already heard, AASHTO is the membership association for all 50 state DOTs, DC and Puerto Rico. We cover all modes. We are multimodal. And the goal really is to be able to provide a place for our members to share best practices and work on innovations. And you heard just now from some of our really great leaders, Colorado and Utah. So next slide. So a couple of years ago, AASHTO restructured the committees. And I don't mean to bore you with our organizational chart, but I do want to point out that in the restructuring, they created this middle box there, that kind of yellow box, enterprise and cross-discipline committees. And our committee that has jurisdiction over resilience, the Transportation System Security and Resilience Committee, is in that box. And that really is guiding our approach to resilience at the committee level for AASHTO, in how we are meant to work with all of the program delivery and operations committees there in the orange box. The other thing that we do is work closely with our performance-based management committee that is also in that enterprise cross-discipline committee box. They have a subcommittee under that committee on risk. So we do a lot of risk and resilience related work with them. Next slide. So I know it's the definition is, you would think, would be an easy thing to define what resilience is. Several years ago, though, probably 4 or 5, this was something that we were working on to really solidify for our members and internally at AASHTO what we mean when we say resilience. So I always include this slide in these presentations to just give you a sense that we did work for a time on defining resilience, and we went through a process to adopt this definition. So I always like to include it. And I think I will make sure that you have a copy of this slide deck. So feel free to share that adopted definition. Next slide. So this graphic really explains how we approach resilience, and that organizational chart I just showed you. TSSR is a relatively new committee at AASHTO. It was created when they restructured our committee structure. So our first chair of TSSR was Mike Lewis, the former executive director of the Colorado DOT. And he felt like it was important for us to graphically show what we mean when we talk about taking a holistic view of resilience. And so that outer circle is really, you know, and when I showed that definition, we talk about preparing for and planning for system disruptions. That's what we're talking about. We wanted to show that when we're talking about resilience, we're not talking about it in a siloed perspective, but really that it would infuse all of the life cycle. That's what Mike Lewis used to call it, of a transportation program. And so, yeah, Frank, you can go on to this next slide. So this graphic, which is a little bit more fun than the first one, was put together out of a peer exchange that we did in 2017. We had like 40 state DOT folks come together, and we had a cartoonist in the room to draw this graphic. And these are the kinds of things that we heard throughout the 3 days of this peer exchange, you know. And I think the one thing that kept coming up over and over again was that there in the corner on the right side of your screen, you can see a chef, and he's baking resilience into everything that we do. And so that's kind of been the way that we've approached resilience, you know, since we came up with the definition and under Mike Lewis's leadership. And now the chair of TSSR is Ed Sniffen from the Hawaii DOT. He's the deputy director of highways, and he shares this vision. And so this is really, you know, a fun way of showing how we view resilience. Next slide. So what are we doing at AASHTO? As I mentioned earlier, you know, one of the things that we like to do is provide this place for our members to learn from one another. One of my roles at AASHTO is managing the Center for Environmental Excellence, which we have in partnership with Federal Highway. This year, resilience is a big part of our work plan. We're building a portal to have this kind of information easily accessible to our members, and making sure that we're incorporating some of the research that I know Maria is going to talk about that we work on with or through the National Cooperative Highway Research Program. There's a lot of resilience related research that's being conducted right now. And so we want to make sure that we're leveraging the deliverables or the outcomes of that research. And it, you know, like right now, one of the projects we're working on is how do you make the case organizationally within a DOT for the idea that resilience should be seen as a holistic effort. So a lot going on, and we want to make sure that we have this one-stop shop for our members. The other thing that we do is a resilience webinar series. We do these annually. Last year in 2020, as you can imagine, we did quite a bit around the pandemic, but we tried to also couch it in a way that, you know, we can pull lessons learned from the pandemic and the way that the states kind of had to act quickly in a number of areas. So those recordings are on our website. And, I know you saw it earlier in this presentation, so feel free to go there and watch. We are working on a new webinar series this year focused on resilience topics, and all of that is to be determined, but we are working on that. And then a peer exchange. Yes, we are. We're supposed to have an in-person peer exchange at some point. It was supposed to happen last year. I think we're targeting for sometime in 2022. But just share this slide with you so that you can see that we are continually providing this kind of resource for our members and for other stakeholders. And next slide. So we also have a technical services program on resilience. It also incorporates a little bit of sustainability in there. It's a pooled fund, so it's a voluntary membership that our states can join. We have a climate briefing newsletter that comes out every other month. And we'll do another webinar series through that technical services program as well. The pooled fund also helps support the work of the TSSR committee. And at any rate, I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Those resources are also available on the AASHTO website. And last but not least, I am happy to answer any questions now at the conclusion of the presentation, or feel free to email me or call me at any time, and I can direct you where all of the information is that I just ran through. So thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciated being able to participate.
Thanks, Melissa. And again, to AASHTO staff's credit, she means it. All of them, and I've always reached out to anybody. It's kind of like, they don't pick up the phone and say, "May I help you?" But I mean, it's that same vibe. They understand that we're their customers, and Melissa, you guys do a great job. I consistently say that. So I'm going to let Maria pull herself up, get ready. And Melissa had mentioned, it says Maria AECOM, but you're actually a contractor to AASHTO, and you're going to talk about some of that research that you're doing for Melissa and AASHTO, which indirectly means for us, the state DOTs and the world at large, right?
Yep, definitely.
Excellent, thank you.
So I should be sharing my screen.
Looks good. I guess you just need to hit a slideshow, right? There we go. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It's a little bit slow. So thank you so much for the introduction. Again, I'm Maria Pena. I work for AM Corporation, and currently I'm going to be presenting some of the ongoing recent resilience projects that are under the NCHRP, the National Cooperative Highway Research Program for TRB. Many of these projects have been sponsored by AASHTO, so they are going to be really great resources that are going to be available for you. Some of these are in the early stages, maybe a couple of months, 2-3 months underway. One in particular is going to be published by summer. So I'm going to be giving you just a high-level overview of all these projects. So one of them is the NCHRP 2309. And all these numbers are a little bit confusing, so I'm going to kind of give you the high-level title of the project. So this one is basically to develop a scoping study for a highway standard to calculate risk and resilience. It's not the standard, but it's the scoping study. So one of the things that we keep hearing in all the research projects and reach out to states and other transportation agencies is that there is a lack of standard procedures and tools to use in order to calculate risk and resilience. Every state is doing kind of something on their own, but there is a lack of really a standard that everybody can be at the same level and can follow. So this project is to get ideas, to identify what the gaps are, what the needs are, And is part of the objective of this project is to develop a consistent set of risk and resilience glossary of terms. You can see, I mean, different organizations use different terms. Even resilience and risk are defined differently all over, especially in the transportation. We can find many different definitions for these terms. So part of the project is to have a glossary of terms that everybody can go and have the same definition to be used. Also part of that is to develop a research roadmap in order to develop that highway standard, and also to develop research problem statements that are going to help in the future to put together for this standard development. The state that we are in this project, we're going to have 2 workshops that we are looking for participation from a transportation agency, especially state DOTs. They're going to be the same content, but we decided to divide it in 2 different dates so we can offer more participation. So the first one is March 22nd, and the second one is April 12th. There is a flyer going around. Maybe it's going to be distributed with the people attending this session. If you are interested in participating, you can register for either one of the workshops. We are really looking forward to hear from you what the needs are. Part of this standard definitely includes freight. When we calculate risk, one of the things that we estimate is the consequences when, for example, a bridge goes down. What's the consequence to the freight or in the truck community? So I've done different pilot studies kind of implementing a type of risk standard or risk calculation. And user cost, especially from the truck traffic, is one of the highest consequences that we estimate when determining risk. So definitely we would love to hear from you. So if, please, if you can participate, register for these events. We would love to hear from you. And the next one that we are working is OA129. This is mostly resilience concepts in general. It's not just risk, but it's resilience and how to incorporate concepts and strategies into transportation planning. The main objective for this one is to develop a roadmap again on how to incorporate these concepts into the planning areas, different areas, and develop a guidebook that the state DOTs or any other transportation agency can use in order to incorporate resilience at different levels. One of the main things for the state DOTs is to develop the state freight plan. So that's an important aspect of this project, is how you can incorporate these concepts and strategies on the different planning, asset management plans, transit, freight, etc. So we are in, we perform a 2-minute drill. That's what we call it. Was a set of survey questions that we had around 90 participants in that workshop from state DOTs, AASHTO, TRB, for a highway, transit agencies, MPO, ports as well, international agencies, and academia. So the main identified needs that we could hear from everybody on that workshop was the need for a formal definition. Also the need for policies, processes, tools, metrics, and performance indicators that help transportation agencies to introduce resilience. Just for TRB, just created a full committee just for transportation resilience metrics. So that's one of the main goals as well, and one of the main gaps that we have here. Some of the benefits that has been identified, we have resilience incorporated into planning, is that you are going to be proactive. You don't have to wait until you have an event and you lose connectivity. You're going to be proactive, and that the long term is going to have some cost savings besides other benefits. Then the 5 top challenges that we have identified when trying to incorporate resilience is that there are financial constraints. Not all the agencies have a pod or a budget to implement these strategies. So definitely funding is one of the constraints that we have identified as number one. Also, as I mentioned before, lack of established assessment methods and tools, even lack of buy-in from the staff and leadership, need for training to the staff that is working on this process, and need of accuracy of data. Not only lack of data, but also sometimes the agencies have the data, but it's not accurate enough to be utilized. The other project that we have, this is the one that I mentioned is almost done and ready to be published, hopefully by summer, is how to integrate effectively transportation performance, risk, and asset management practices. So we know we have asset management, and we have performance, and we have risk, but how we can integrate the three of them into one. So the main goals of the objectives for this particular project was to develop a guidance that helps transportation agencies in order to incorporate these three practices. So as you see there is a kind of a picture of the front of that guidance. And this guidance is kind of divided in 5 main topics, where we provide guidance for each one of the particulars and how to incorporate or how to integrate the 3 factors. So one of them is the approaches to integration in general. The second one is data and software needs, followed by personnel and skills, policy and agency structure, and also resource requirements. So those 5 were the 5 main areas that we see that there is need for better guidance on how to integrate these 3 practices. Part of the guidance as well, it was a maturity assessment framework. And also as part of the project, we developed a roadmap for how to integrate these 3 components. Part of the guidance or the project was to test this particular guidance, and we tested with 5 transportation or 4 transportation agencies and 1 transit, and they the DOTs that participated on this test for the guidance was Utah DOT, Vermont, Minnesota, Caltrans, and we had also from the transit agencies, we have TriMet for Portland, Oregon. So then the last 2 that I'm going to be touching on are NCHRP 2123-04 is the development of a risk management strategic plan and research roadmap. This is basically for risk management at all levels, from the enterprise to the program and the project, so all levels of risk management. And the goals is to develop an approach and action plan where AASHTO, TRB, and Federal Highway can coordinate all the risk management activities. As you can see, there is a lot going on. AASHTO has a lot of really good resources related to risk and resilience, but there is still a need of coordination between AASHTO, TRB, and Federal Highway. So we see this as a great project, so that way we can have all the partners talking together and we have a more useful product. And part of this project is also to develop a long-term risk management research roadmap, which is gonna also have research problem statements. And the last project that I wanna talk about, and Melissa just mentioned it, is the NCHRP 2127, which is the business case and communication strategies for state DOT's resilience efforts. We have all these great products out there, and the agencies are trying to incorporate risk and resilience, but how they make this business case in order to get the leadership buy-in and get these financial investments into resilience strategies. Craig just mentioned before, one of the things that we find really interesting is the development or use of these communication strategies. He was talking all over about GIS and how GIS has been great on how to communicate the needs and how to incorporate this resilience. So things like these are really important because you can have really good standards and tools, but if you don't know how to make a business case and how to communicate it to the stakeholders and the leadership and even the public, there is certain limitations. So this is a really important project that we're really excited to be working on because we think it's going to be really interesting for the state DOTs and transportation agencies. So this is all some of the projects that we are working on that AASHTO is being sponsoring for us. So if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. This is my email on the screen. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Maria. That was, I was taking notes, even though you have it on the screen too. And if folks don't know, if they've never, again, if not, at one point I was young and didn't know these things, and I always forget, I had older people to explain how things work. So the NCHRP reports, right, when they're done, they kind of get assigned a TRB number, and then you can go to TRB's website and download them. If you're a TRB member, like state DOTs that support it, you can pull these off. They're like manuals, right? They're literally handbooks on the topic, start to finish. It's like, you know, you never finish school, except you don't have to pay tuition. You guys, your state DOT already has, right? So what I'm going to do, scroll myself back up, unless Frank says I'm wrong, to the beginning, unless he wants to do it, to the beginning of the chat. Looks like about 11:13. And some of these, you guys did a great job of answering all along. We just got too excited in the audience because you guys said too much good stuff. So 11:13, Justin asked the same question that then I saw later, I think answered, but I would love Craig and Patrick to if they want to tell more stories. I know when we did dry run, they had great stories to tell about knowing what's going on over your back fence, if you will. Again, your neighbors, basically vertical clearance restrictions just over your border. And Craig had a slide that showed, and there's an instance how he did, but you guys, Patrick and Craig, what else would you guys talk about just regularly that, you know, as neighbor states on this issue, or anything else that you just kind of trade information, or, you know, over the fence?
Yeah, I think AASHTO, WASHTO, and some of the other groups have really allowed us to have good preliminary conversations about how do we address those. So similar to what I answered in the comments, is that it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to prioritize, you know, putting money into a structure that will fix a vertical clearance if right on the other side of the border in Utah, they also have a challenge for us, and they don't have intentions to fix that anytime soon. And so working closely with New Mexico, or just all of our neighbors, helps us in the decision-making process if this is the right project to take on this year, or can we get on some kind of type of timeline to where our neighboring state also plans to fix their issue. And really, I think this opens up some opportunities for us to look at freight corridors, you know, regionally, and really focus on regional improvements, because, you know, similar to say I-80 or I-70 out west, they're so important for not just Colorado or Utah, but just moving freight from coast to coast, just that mobility there, and keeping those roads open through our winter months is always a challenge. And so can we continue to work on collectively as a, you know, a region to keep those quality freight routes? We're not building structures too low. You know, if we're building anything new, I really think there's opportunity for more relationships there, really, and to work together. But quite honestly, if I reach out to someone in Utah, I get an answer that day. And so I've had a lot of really good experience working with other permitting departments or other folks that have similar roles as I do in the state DOTs in our neighbors. But I look forward to working more with them as well, because again, like we had in the fire situation, we had to go to everybody's website to find that information, and we were doing that kind of frantically. But in the future, I would love to just have that already built into my system, or some way that we can communicate more effectively in those times of need.
I would agree wholeheartedly with Craig. Interestingly, Craig talked about Lizzie Kemp, who was working on their rockfall hazards and stumbled across their most critical asset that they could fix easily were these small culverts. And through our TSSR AASHTO committee, I got to know Lizzie a little bit better, and had phone calls with her. We went out to Colorado and visited, and she was able to share some of the GIS and work that they've done on their culverts, which has completely changed our focus into those high risk, low dollar fixes that we can do within our system. And so that connection right there has been fantastic. To build upon what Craig has said, there was a time a number of years ago where our legislature increased the speed limit, or they allowed an increase in speed limit on our roadways up to 80 miles an hour. Well, we have I-80 that runs into Wyoming, and Evanston, Wyoming is right on the border, about 4 miles away. And so as we were changing those speed limits, they were able to reach out to us and say, hey, we have a drastic speed reduction down to 65 miles an hour right before our port of entry. And so can we put some speed reduction signs and some lower speed limits within your borders to be able to get those trucks down to the right speed? And I think by working with the states, we were able to accommodate and not create a problem for our cars and trucks and freight that were coming through that corridor going into another state.
That is, again, what did I tell you guys? I picked the right people. We got the dream team on this panel. So thanks, you guys. The next one is, of course, my comment, and is I think I type as much as I talk, too much. In other words, I had a college professor say to me, and you probably heard me say this before, all data is good, but free data is better. So you guys, pulled on a lot of sources that typically the freight nerds like me think, well, it's not the normal stuff, but I have neighbor offices that I can use this, permitting information. Is there any thoughts of anything else that you just exist off the top of your head, not which offices, but just what pops in your head? I always say, have you taken a traffic op, if you're a freight planner in a planning office, have you taken a traffic ops person to lunch? What are your thoughts on that? Obviously, I forgot about the permitting office because they're part of that. So I wrote that down, and still I'll say that you gave me the idea, but what are you guys' thoughts on that?
This is Craig. I'm actually lucky. I report to our director that also oversees our traffic ops center. And so I'm in, monthly meetings with those folks. My staff looks at 4 TVs all day that are connected to our traffic ops center. So we know when an issue is coming up. We can run a report real quickly if we have a severe accident and reach out to the companies and be able to divert OSOW traffic, single trip traffic. And obviously we jump right onto the communication side where we have over 7,500 users that are getting text messages or emails from us when we have a serious incident and are requesting to reroute loads, And so that was the point of CDOT's freight office, kind of integrate freight planning and freight operations in that way. The one thing I would suggest too, from a planning perspective, we do this with planners and our port of entry officers. We have them do a ride along, and we have that set up through our Colorado Motor Carriers Association. They do a 6-hour ride along in the cab of a truck, the passenger seat. And we've had a couple people go over some of our really, I would say, challenging mountain passes, and it gives them a whole different perspective on the challenges that a truck driver may have on a daily basis. And it really, I feel like, helps people get a good sense of what they're planning for. And I just bring that from 10 years in the trucking management experience in California, Nevada, and Colorado. Everywhere I've ever been has had some significant challenges with snow and winter months. And so I just think perspective has been huge, by those ride along types. But I agree with you, Tom. I think sitting down with your traffic ops folks really help you understand the challenges that they see as well. And some of your solutions can come quickly out of those conversations.
If I could add, I would piggyback on what Craig's presentation really showed us, is that maps are powerful, right? That if you can look at a map with the right information, that you can make good decisions. And we have our deputy director. She has a firm belief that everyone should have their own GIS map and be able to pull layers in from anywhere, any data that's out there, be able to put that on a map to help make decisions. And so that is something that we need to train our folks on, is being comfortable in that world of just creating their own maps. And I think as we get more proficient in that and more sophisticated in our data layers, that we're going to have those sorts of conversations that we're going to pull in traffic data, we're going to pull in signal data, we're going to pull in asset data, we're going to pull in freight number data, and we're going to look and say, what am I missing? And how can I show that in this and analyze my problems with respect to what other people are seeing? And that spurs conversations as to why is it this way? How can we fix it? What is your issue in this area? And how does that compare to the fix that I'm proposing? So those GIS maps become more and more powerful.
Patrick, or if I could just add to that, because I couldn't agree more with Patrick. Obviously, I didn't even put a lot of words on my slides because I think the maps tell a great story of what you're trying to get to the point to. And when I was talking about the structure P18BP, which I always look to as kind of our first proven project to come out of this work. So I jokingly tell the story about how I had a 30-minute time slot with our executive management team to discuss the idea. And I don't wear suits. I'm except during city council, I'm a very non-suit type of guy. But I put on my suit and I was ready to do this presentation. I got in there and 5 minutes in, they shut me down and approved the project and told me to leave. And so it didn't take 30 minutes because the map told the entire story that I needed to tell without having to verbalize it. And, they saw the value immediately. They saw the ROI potential. And the map really did everything that I needed to do. And I probably could have came in gym shorts and flip flops and it would have had the same exact impact. And so, I really agree with Patrick that the reason that we even have a freight office at CDOT, I would attribute to GIS work that we've done. We've shown the need through GIS to have more of a clear focus on the impacts that freight has to our system and how we can continue to improve freight mobility, which will have secondary benefits of reducing congestion, of better GHG reduction, so on and so forth. And so, I would advocate for GIS, GIS work or GIS enhancements for everybody, because I think that is kind of the way of the future and the way to communicate our needs.
I'm looking at the time. I'm going to throw two out there. This will be a quick one for Maria, and I put it in the chat box. Would you, based on what we talked about, the freight planners and the operations folks, is it safe to say that the NCHRP projects are not for either one? It's kind of both. Like the idea is they're written and all the work is that everybody could see something in it and to take away, whether in operations or freight planning?
Yeah, definitely. One of the main things, especially for the standard that we keep talking, is that part of the standard is even criticality, and part of the criticality is redundancy maps. So one of the important factors when we develop, for example, the redundancy maps is that, okay, we close this road segment, then we have a bunch of different detours that we can take, but can the trucks go there or not? So one of the major exercises that we have done with these on different DOTs is trying to develop redundancy maps that help to identify those truck traffic roads. That's just one example of, for example, the NCHRP that deals with the standard development. And also the planning. Planning is another huge one that freight is part of it, especially the state freight plans and how DOTs can communicate with the freight community and how they can incorporate that into the freight plans. Same with the business case. We just saw Craig and Patrick how they use GIS to really make the case for recent resilience. So definitely.
And I think we all answered my question. I got it kind of combined about, bridges that are on the secondary or what I call rural routes, where people think, for me, agriculture is still the #1 business in Georgia. So that's why I can still say these need attention. You know, this is not an interstate, but so I like the map showing, especially, you know, the timber location, that they're part of a system and a network. Unless you guys have anything, I'll close it by letting you guys open up, because I thought, you know, maybe agriculture, or on the east, you know, east of the, whatever they say, eastern Colorado, right? Agriculture, or maybe in Utah, maybe these rural routes are for tourism, right? Ski season or whatever. Before I turn it over to them to close this out, I did put up a couple of links in the chat box. One of them is, I think, to the AASHTO webinar, bookmark it. Everything that their webinars are coming up are there. And I threw a link to the report that Melissa mentioned with the cartoon. I looked at it, there's pictures of the workshop they did. I saw several people that are very high up in my organization there. Some of my neighbor states, I saw the current commissioner from South Carolina DOT. So I thought, oh, that's a good report for me to know, because if they were there, I better know it too.